research on the co-victims of murdered individuals and where the offender has been executed. The reason why I got into this is I happened to be in Connecticut during John Rowland's administration as a governor. And prior to him being incarcerated, he decided he was going to win some votes by executing Michael Ross, the serial killer who killed 8 girls and women. And this happened in 2005, prior to election time. And the outcry for it was much along the lines of retribution, these family members need closure. And then I was lucky enough to see the job opening at Lamar, and unfortunately for Jim, he hired me. And part of the reason was I figured Connecticut had that one execution in 2005, and since then they've abolished the death penalty in 2012. And so it was good timing for me to head to Texas so I could have a look at this, because there are plenty of individuals throughout Texas who have had family members killed where that offender has been murdered. All right. So just a quick introduction. The idea was to look at the co-victim's emotions post-execution. This is a topic that's been researched in a very limited manner. But so what I was looking at here, do co-victims have a sense of closure? And Peter made a little bit of a comment yesterday about how much he enjoys that term. And it is something that you'll see where the co-victims express some frustration with that term as well. But, and then I was also looking at, do co-victims perceive a sense of justice? So those are two very different ideas that that emerged throughout this research. And then finally, what other emotions emerge post-execution? That was something that was purely driven by the respondents here in this research. So to help me guide this, obviously just brief mention of the justification of punishment. Incapacitation was not being used in Connecticut for one of the justifications for this execution. Deterrence was brought up, saying that it'll scare off, if we execute Michael Ross in Connecticut, other serial killers will avoid Connecticut. Let's stay in Massachusetts. Watch out, John. But obviously rehabilitation was not used, but the overwhelming justification of punishment that was used over and over was retribution. And we heard people in Connecticut talking about an eye for an eye, evil for evil. And much of it was thrown out as we have to consider the feelings of justice for co-victims. Whether or not we actually talked to the victims, they were proponents of the death penalty, saying we're going to take care of these co-victims by executing Michael Ross. Right. So this is also used, obviously, in Texas, along with deterrence, as an idea to keep the death penalty around. All right. When we look at homicide in general, in terms of the effects that it has on the co-victims, obviously for any of the, say loved ones, we assume that you love your family members, they experience tremendous amounts of personal grief. This is very different than a natural death. They also experience stigmatization by family, friends, and associates. All right. We find, and research shows, that individuals tend to be excommunicated from groups, driven out. They receive stigma in terms of being someone that is too emotional. They lose jobs. You also tend to see high rates of divorce amongst couples where a family member has been murdered, whether it's a child or a father or mother. All right. They also obviously experience high rates of depression, PTSD, and one of the things that's hit on Jim's topic yesterday, very high rates of frustration with the criminal justice system, with how the case is being handled, lack of information being given to them by the DA. The DA wants to keep all of it very quiet. They want to keep things to themselves, obviously having to do with the case. And this research, as I mentioned, suggests that it's much more traumatic to lose a family member to homicide or any abrupt death versus a natural death. And that obviously is rather intuitive there. On previous research with co-victims, we find that there is very limited research looking at the experiences for family members on death row. Much of this research, especially by Burns in 2006, focuses specifically on individuals that are currently on death row. So it's asking the co-victims, well, how do you feel about the execution upcoming? All right, so much of this has to do with individuals who have not been executed yet. So they're talking to co-victims and getting their emotions or feelings about, well, what do you think about this? And of course, the family members are charged up at the time. They're still angry. Think about that last slide I have there where I was talking about the frustration with the criminal justice system. Obviously, in the United States, one of the frustrations with the death penalty is the time from conviction to execution. Where our home state of Texas has put in an express lane to the death chamber. Many other states, it averages out to about 11 years before someone is executed. What this research suggests, though, is that about 25 to 40% of the individuals suggest that there will be feelings of closure. All right, again, they're forecasting whether or not they will feel closure. So we don't know because the person hasn't been executed. And 29 to 45% said they will have feelings of justice. All right. There are major differences in methodology compared when what they did versus what I've been doing. My study, I've completed 19 semi-structured in-depth interviews with co-victims. Right? It's been extremely difficult to get those individuals. Mainly when I call them, you have to get them to buy into, I'm not part of the media. Obviously, they're rather frustrated with the media and everything that goes along with it. My survey instrument included 5 very open-ended questions relating to the death penalty and emotions, and at the end, pretty much, where are you at now, kind of detail. But I let the respondent lead the discussion so that I could gain narratives from them to analyze this data. Right? The interviews varied dramatically. The 2 short ones were also the 2 individuals that were very much in support of the death penalty, and the individuals were angry and I'd like to do it again with, bring their body up and let's do it again type mentality, whereas most of them lasted about 50 minutes to just over an hour. And again, I let the respondent guide that discussion. In terms of who fits a co-victim, for my study here, it's parents, so mother or father, children, the daughters and sons, and spouses and siblings. I did not go to cousins, extended family, so they all had to be immediate family for me to include them in the study. The selection of participants, how did I find them? Well, being where we're in the epicenter of the death penalty in the United States. The county that we happen to be in and where Houston is at are the death penalty counties that sentence more people in the United States than anywhere else to execution. So I used the Death Penalty Info Center to compile a list of individuals from Texas, and then started looking simply in the newspaper to find out which ones were still in, their family members were still in the Houston area, and that's very easy to do. From this, I was able to get some individuals, and I found out one of the things that popped up that I didn't expect is that many of these co-victims are networked with one another. And they say that they use one another to help cope with what's happened to them because, one of the things that they point out is unless you've had someone murdered, you really can't understand what they go through. So they use each other, and so being able to call on them, they were able to get me in touch with other co-victims. And then I was also able to talk to defense attorneys who represented the offender, who also happened to know the family members of the co-victims. For this, I contacted 43 potential respondents. So that's a potential issue that out of 43, I got 19. I oftentimes had people just hanging up the phone on me. And one of the first things I said, I'm from Lamar University, hoping that they wouldn't hang up on me, but I did get several of those. But several of them said something along the lines of, do not want to relive those feelings again. Obviously, after someone's murdered, they go through the ringers with the media. Then when the case is coming up for execution, same thing again, the media goes and talks to them. So you can understand why they didn't want to talk to me. The length of time since execution, again, this is something that is different for my study in terms of methodology. Previous research on co-victims was based off of media reports immediately following the interview. So Burton and Tewksbury looked at the Houston Chronicle, for example, the next day after the execution took place to see what were the family members saying, what were the co-victims saying. There's obvious limitations with that because then you're getting what the reporter picked out as the juiciest comment. All right. So what I looked at then is individuals who have already been executed, and the shortest time period since execution was 3 years and 6 months. So that was the most recent one. It was also the one with the most tears. It seems like a lot of these other individuals have gotten pretty cold, pretty hard about the situation. But the longest length of time was 19 years, averaging them out to 8 years, 9 months since the execution has taken place. The results of the study, where I analyzed the narratives of what our discussion suggests there's 4 themes that really pop up. The definitions of closure, right? Desistance of closure, desistance of perceived feelings of justice, and then the current emotions that they're feeling. So looking at the definitions of closure, for instance, mother of the victim said, what the hell? So many people said I should feel closure. What does that mean? So when we talk about that word closure that you brought up, yes, the respondents were frustrated with that. Okay? Now, the question I asked them did not have the word closure in it. I specifically asked them, do you have feelings of being healed? Which is another way to get at this, because I didn't want to use the word closure to lead them in that direction. And eventually that word popped up. When they would bring it up, then of course I would say, okay, well, what do you mean by closure? And she even said the word closure, and I said, well, what do you mean by closure? And that's when she said, what the hell? So many people said I would feel closure. What does that mean? So it really frustrated her. The father of the victim said, I guess we are supposed to be healed, right? Meaning, he doesn't know what that means either. And then the sister, at first I thought I understood closure, but now I'm not sure. Maybe I just don't know if my feelings understand that they are supposed to shut off. Again, it was very clear from the sister that this is not something that, as much as people wanted to, that say, oh, well, they have closure now, the feelings go on. Right? Now, when we talked about healing or closure, there was a very clear theme that after the individual has been executed, given a time period, a few months, a year, whatever feelings they had prior to the execution, if they felt healing or closure, have reemerged. So the son of a victim said, who was a witness, so most of these individuals did not witness the execution. I did have six of them that witnessed the execution. So he said, I wanted that son of a bitch dead. I wanted to throw the switch, and when he was pronounced dead, I felt I could breathe again. But it didn't take long for the rage to return, about 3 months, and the anger was back. So again, obviously, that shows that the healing, whatever healing or closure that they might have felt, was gone. That, he was still angry, and this son told me he was in counseling 2 or 3 times a week to help him. He goes, prior to, I think it was his mother, or I can't remember if it was his mother or his father, but he said he was not an angry individual. He said, now, he goes, I'm one of the angriest people you ever meet. He goes, I just live with rage. The husband of a victim that said that, the district attorney argued that we needed closure at the trial. Well, after he was killed, you realize that she's not coming back. And that was something that came up over and over, that, okay, there's been an execution, my family member is not coming back. They're not returning. It doesn't matter what they did with this offender, they're not coming back. And it takes time for them to get that there's been violence, but their family member is not going to reemerge, and so therefore they're still feeling the pain. And your heart gets ripped out again. That's not closure, she's still gone. Right. And then finally, sister of a victim, closure. That didn't last long, it still hurts, So it says there was some feeling or some type of healing that took place, and then they realized that it's not over. So that feeling of healing or closure disappears quickly. There's also the desistance of some type of perceived justice that disappears. So this whole process makes you hate the law. I don't care what they did to that asshole. His dead body ain't worth my little girl. So when somebody is executed, they might actually look at Lady Justice as having the scales. After a while, they then think of it as, I don't care what they did to them. The victim of our family member outweighs whatever they did to that person. So it didn't help them. That justice, the feeling of justice is gone. Mother of a victim. At first it felt like justice, sure, but now, well, even then it didn't, I guess, but it really doesn't feel like justice now. All right, this mother was one of those individuals. She was really disappointed throughout the whole process of the criminal justice system. She was one of the ones that was very bitter towards the DA and the police, saying she was really blinded for the 2 years, or almost 2 years it took to convict the individual. And then, she decided not to go to the execution because of how bitter she felt toward the criminal justice system. And she said, okay, yeah, I kind of felt like justice, but it doesn't any longer. And then finally, the mother of a victim who was a witness, hell yeah, when we walked out of there, the media was there. We were all charged up and some of the anger was gone. So in Texas, when you're the witness, the state witness, and you walk out of the death chamber after it's occurred, the media is there and they all want a sound clip. And so she was talking about how I had plenty of one-liners for them and they used them in the media. But look around this house, she's still gone. You realize that she's never coming back. You can never feel justice. So whatever justice she had is clearly gone from her. Then we look at the current emotions. The brother of a victim who witnessed that, he just, when I asked him, the last question I said, well, where are you now emotionally? And he said, I'm simply empty inside. He said, there's nothing left in there. He said, every day is a struggle kind of thing. The mother of the victim, after a while you find a new normal, but it sucks. What happened was more violence in the name of my daughter, and you never recover. And I find the father of the victim. I was worried you were going to ask me that. I feel like each day I have a tornado ripping through my heart. His daughter, I think she was 4 or 5 at the time she was abducted and killed. So it was, going through the interview, he seemed fine until I asked the question, well, where are you now emotionally? And that's what really got to him. The reason why this research is important is simply because of the policy implications. Again, there are a lot of individuals who use retribution as a justification for the death penalty. And they say, they argue that this retribution needs to take place so that there is a feeling of justice and there's a feeling of closure. Well, clearly, overwhelmingly, my respondents said no. Again, I had 2 out of the 19 who were, hell yeah, this was great. Again, they were still just as angry, and it took too long, I want to execute them again. And then, but overwhelmingly, the feelings of justice and closure clearly dissipate over time. All right? So as a result, it's hard to use that as a justification for execution. One of the biggest complaints, though, was, and so this is one I'm saying, for any individual that's for the death penalty, one of their biggest complaints was that it took too long. That waiting those years, finally when it happened, it just didn't relieve them. So again, the biggest thing was how bitter they were towards the criminal justice system, and the one mother victim summed it up. Those pigs made us feel like shit. When talking about police, the DA, she just saw them as an entire group. So, in conclusion, the co-victims of murder victims experience a range of emotions that dramatically change post-execution. All right, it's not something where it occurs and, hey, things are better now. It's not. Often said they were talking about there's a roller coaster of emotions that take place. There's a bunch of psychological consequences in terms of PTSD and depression, and severe sociological consequences in terms of being ostracized, because oftentimes they go through a divorce, which many people look at it as a negative. Oftentimes they have to change jobs, the media attacking them. So, what I really think we need to look at is the negative consequences exacerbated by the execution of the offender. So, the mother of the victim said, violence, you simply get more violence. How does that make anything better? She said, she focused on how there was just violence upon violence, and when it was done in her daughter's name, she said it didn't make anything better. And now it's time for questions for all of us.